That's not my baby. The words exploded in the hushed, dimly lit ultrasound room, shattering the quiet intimacy we had shared just moments before. Mark's voice, usually a comforting baritone, was raw with disbelief in something else, something colder, something that sent a shiver of ice down my spine. His eyes, usually warm and loving, were wide with a mixture of shock and furious accusation, fixed on the grainy black and white image flickering on the screen above us. The image of our child. My child. The child we had both been so excited to meet. Except apparently, according to Mark, it wasn't his. My breath hitched in my throat, a strangled gasp that mirrored the sudden, suffocating pressure in my chest. My hand, which had been resting gently on my still flat stomach, instinctively tightened, protectively cradling the tiny life growing within me, the life that was now inexplicably being questioned, rejected, denied by the man I loved, the man I was about to marry, the man who was supposed to be the father of this child. What? What are you talking about? I stammered, my voice barely a whisper, trembling with a confusion that bordered on terror. My gaze flickered between Mark's thunderstruck face and the ultrasound screen, desperately searching for an explanation, for some kind of logical reason behind his shocking outburst. Was he joking? Was this some kind of bizarre, cruel prank? But the raw anguish etched on his features, the icy fury burning in his eyes, told me this was no joke. This was real. This was a nightmare unfolding in real time, in the sterile, impersonal setting of a doctor's office, with the silent, oblivious ultrasound technician hovering nearby, her face carefully neutral, her eyes averted, pretending not to witness the catastrophic implosion of my carefully constructed world. Don't play innocent with me, Sarah. Mark's voice was louder now, sharper, laced with a bitter accusation that cut through me like a shard of glass. He stepped back from the ultrasound table, his body rigid, his hands clenched into fists, his entire posture radiating a cold, furious rejection. That ultrasound, that baby, it's too far along. It's not possible. It's not mine. His words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating as a shroud, each syllable a hammer blow against the fragile foundations of my relationship, my future, my very identity. Too far along? What did he mean, too far along? I was confused, disoriented, reeling from the unexpected force of his accusation, my mind struggling to grasp the impossible, the unthinkable, the devastatingly clear implication of his words. He thought. He thought I had been unfaithful. He thought this baby, our baby, was not his. He thought I had lied. He thought I had betrayed him. Tears welled up in my eyes, hot, stinging tears of disbelief and hurt, and a dawning, terrifying understanding of the chasm that had just opened up between us, a chasm that seemed to stretch into infinity, threatening to swallow everything I held dear. Mark, please, I pleaded, my voice cracking, tears streaming down my face now, blurring my vision, distorting the already surreal reality of the ultrasound room. You're wrong. You have to be wrong. This is your baby, our baby. I swear to you, Mark, I would never. My voice trailed off, choked with sobs, the words inadequate, futile, meaningless in the face of his unwavering, furious certainty. He just stared at me, his expression hardening, his eyes narrowing with a cold, dismissive skepticism that was more painful than any outright rage. Don't lie to me, Sarah, he repeated, his voice flat, devoid of warmth, devoid of love, devoid of everything I thought we shared. I know what I know. I know the dates. I know it's not mine. And in that moment, standing in the sterile, impersonal confines of the ultrasound room, with the image of our unborn child flickering silently on the screen above us, I knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in my bones, that my life, my carefully constructed future, my fairy tale romance with Mark was about to shatter into a million irreparable pieces. The ultrasound, meant to be a joyous celebration of new life, had become a brutal instrument of revelation, exposing a secret, a misunderstanding, a devastating truth that threatened to destroy everything I held dear. To understand the devastating irony of Mark's accusation, to unravel the tangled threads of miscommunication and hidden assumptions that had led us to this catastrophic moment. We need to rewind, back to the beginning, back to the seemingly idyllic start of our relationship, back to the subtle, almost imperceptible cracks that had been forming beneath the surface of our perfect romance, cracks that I, in my naive optimism and unwavering trust, had completely failed to see. My name is Sarah, and until about 5 minutes ago, I thought I was living a fairy tale. I was engaged to Mark, the man of my dreams, a kind, intelligent, handsome, and successful architect who had swept me off my feet from the moment we met. Our relationship had been a whirlwind romance, a rapid fire courtship that had felt like destiny, like something out of a movie. We had met at a friend's wedding, a classic meet cute scenario that felt almost too perfect to be true. He had spilled red wine down my dress, accidentally, of course, charmingly apologetic. We had laughed, we had talked for hours, and by the end of the night, I was completely, irrevocably smitten. Mark was everything I had ever dreamed of in a partner. He was ambitious, driven, with a successful career and a bright future. He was also incredibly romantic, showering me with flowers, writing me love poems, yes, really, love poems, and planning elaborate, surprise dates that made me feel like I was living in a romantic comedy. He was attentive, supportive, and seemed genuinely devoted to me, to us. He told me he loved me within weeks of meeting, proposed within 6 months, and within a year, we were planning our dream wedding, a beautiful summer ceremony overlooking the ocean, a picture perfect start to our picture perfect life together. Or so I thought. Looking back now with the devastating clarity of hindsight, I can see the subtle cracks, the tiny fissures in our seemingly perfect foundation, the warning signs that I, blinded by love and swept away by the fairy tale, had completely ignored. They were small things, initially almost insignificant, easily dismissed as quirks of personality, minor differences in communication styles, harmless misunderstandings. But those small things, those ignored warning signs, those dismissed misunderstandings were like tiny seeds of doubt planted in the fertile ground of my naive optimism. Seeds that would eventually sprout into the monstrous, relationship destroying weed that was now choking the life out of our fairy tale romance. One of the first cracks, the first subtle dissonance in our otherwise harmonious relationship, was our communication style, or rather, our lack of true, open, honest communication. Mark was a man of action, a doer, a problem solver, someone who preferred to communicate through grand gestures, through romantic surprises, through carefully planned dates and elaborate gifts. He was less comfortable with emotional vulnerability, with deep, probing conversations about feelings, anxieties, and insecurities. He was a fixer, not a feeler, someone who preferred to sweep problems under the rug with romantic gestures rather than confronting them head on with honest dialogue. And me? I, in my eagerness to maintain the fairy tale, in my desperate desire to avoid any hint of conflict or disharmony, had played along. I had accepted the romantic gestures, the grand pronouncements of love, the fairy tale dates, and had politely sidestepped the deeper, more uncomfortable conversations that I knew instinctively we needed to have. I had smiled and nodded and agreed, even when I felt a nagging unease, a quiet whisper of doubt in the back of my mind, telling me that something was missing, that something wasn't quite right beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect romance. Another crack, another ignored warning sign, was our differing approaches to, well, to reality, to life outside the fairy tale bubble we had created for ourselves. Mark was a dreamer, a visionary, someone who lived in the realm of grand ideas and ambitious plans, someone who tended to gloss over the practicalities, the details, the messy realities of everyday life. He was an architect, after all, trained to envision grand structures, to create beautiful blueprints, to leave the messy details of construction and implementation to others. And me? I was the pragmatist, the realist, the one grounded in the everyday, the one who worried about the details, the logistics, the practicalities of making those grand visions a reality. I was an event planner, detail-oriented, meticulously organized, trained to anticipate problems, to manage logistics, to make sure every event, every plan, every dream was flawlessly executed, down to the smallest detail. This difference, this fundamental divergence in our approaches to reality, should have been a strength, a complementary balance of vision and practicality, a perfect partnership of dreamer and doer. But instead, it became another source of subtle friction, another area of unspoken misunderstanding, another crack in our fairy tale foundation. Mark often dismissed my concerns about practicalities as nitpicking, as worrying too much, as lacking vision. He saw my attention to detail as a sign of, well, of being less romantic, less spontaneous, less fun. And I, in my eagerness to be the supportive girlfriend, the easygoing fiancé, had again, politely, silently, swallowed my concerns, dismissed my instincts, and allowed Mark's grand visions to take precedence, even when my pragmatic side was screaming at me that those visions were often, well, impractical, unrealistic, and sometimes downright impossible. But the biggest crack, the most significant warning sign, the one that, in hindsight, should have been a deafening alarm bell, was our intimacy, or rather, the subtle, unspoken awkwardness that sometimes permeated our physical relationship, an awkwardness that I, in my naive romanticism, had desperately tried to ignore, to explain away, to pretend wasn't there. From the very beginning, our physical relationship had been passionate, yes, exciting, certainly, but also strangely detached, emotionally distant, almost perfunctory at times. Mark was a skilled and enthusiastic lover, physically, technically proficient, always eager to please, always attentive to my physical pleasure. But there was something missing, something intangible, something deeper. There was a lack of true emotional connection, a subtle barrier between us, a sense that we were going through the motions, fulfilling the physical requirements of a romantic relationship, but not truly connecting, not truly intimate in the deepest, most meaningful sense of the word. And yet I had ignored that too. I had rationalized it, explained it away, told myself it was just my own insecurities, my own inexperience, my own unrealistic expectations of fairy tale romance. I had focused on the grand gestures, the romantic pronouncements, the whirlwind excitement of our courtship, and had deliberately, consciously pushed aside the quiet whisper of doubt, the nagging feeling that something was missing, that something wasn't quite right, that something fundamental was broken beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect love story. And now, in the sterile, accusing silence of the ultrasound room, with Mark's furious accusation echoing in my ears, with the image of our questioned child flickering on the screen above us, the truth, the devastating, heartbreaking truth, was finally, brutally, undeniably revealed. The cracks I had ignored, the warning signs I had dismissed, the doubts I had suppressed had finally coalesced, had finally erupted, shattering the fairy tale, exposing the fragile, flawed reality beneath, a reality built on miscommunication, unspoken assumptions, and a fundamental lack of true intimacy, a reality that was now threatening to destroy everything I had ever believed about Mark, about us, about our future together. Too far along, he had said, his voice cold, accusing. It's not possible. It's it's not mine. And in those devastating words, in that furious, unfounded accusation, the fairy tale finally irrevocably ended. And the nightmare, my nightmare, was just beginning.